Bubba Wallace to sign a multi-year contract extension and will return to 23XI Racing in 2025. Harrison Burton will join AIM Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025, and Nick Sanchez will join Big Machine Racing in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got quite a few NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to talk about the CW, as there was a report by Adam Stern on late Wednesday afternoon that the CW says it has added 25 new advertisers for NASCAR's coverage, including Samsung, Snapchat, KFC, and Toyota. In addition to that, majority of the races will either be full screen action or side-by-side for majority of the races. This is really good news here. Obviously, one of the big things I've said about newer TV is there should be less full screen ads. If you can find a way to do side-by-side, which I think advertisers will like a lot more, I think that's going to be better for everybody involved. And the fact the CW is doing this is really good. Now, we just need to find a way to make sure everyone can watch the races, because from what I understand, people are having a very difficult and not a great time trying to find the races at the CW, and some people are getting the high school football games. So if they could fix that, that definitely would be a really good thing. But I thought the first broadcast was solid, and it's really good to see they have a lot of new advertisers for the events throughout the remainder of this year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Thad Moffet. As Thad Moffet put out a statement on Thursday afternoon confirming that he will not be on track as much for the remainder of 2024 due to lack of funding. Thad Moffet's been driving a 46 truck for Young's Motorsports near the end of the year. Remember, he actually started off in the 46 faction, 46 truck, but things behind the scenes did not go well with funding, and it looks like the funding has dried up, unfortunately for Thad. Look, this really doesn't shock or surprise me. Thad Moffet really has struggled in the truck series this year, has not had a lot of good runs, and I don't think anybody should blame the team for moving on from him, unfortunately. I just was not impressed with the speed that he showed. I do think the people getting by the wheel at the end of the year probably will do a little bit better, and plus this truck isn't really in a good position at owner's points as it is. And that, no disrespect, has really struggled so far this year. So I'm not really shocked or surprised to see this move by Young's Motorsports, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about William Sauvage. As we had the ARCA East Championship race at Bristol, which was a combination race between the ARCA East and the main ARCA series. And William Sauvage was able to go back-to-back and pick up his second straight ARCA East Championship. But he kind of had a little bit of help. Connor Zilisch was easily going to win the ARCA East Championship, and unfortunately, about 70 laps into the race, a couple drivers named Logan Mizuraka and Amber Balkan got in a couple incidents, and Logan basically spun out and crashed, and Connor just had nowhere to go. Connor was not very happy after the race, but he held it back as he, of course, had to run the Truck Series race later that night, which did not go so well for him either, so Bristol wasn't great for him. Though, congratulations to William Sauvage. I think some are going to call this a Mickey Mouse Championship, which I don't think it's a Mickey Championship, considering the fact that William was second in the standings, had finished second a lot this year. It's just that Connor's been a better driver overall. I think a lot of people are frustrated to see him lose that way, and it's definitely a frustrating way to lose a championship, because some people that are running off the pace or in good equipment that don't deserve to be in equipment are causing incidents and wrecks. It's a tough situation. I feel bad for Connor, but congratulations to William Sauvage on winning the ARCA East Championship for the second year in a row. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Goodyear. As Bob Pockers had a chat with some of the executives from Goodyear about some of the things upcoming in regards to Goodyear. And one interesting thing Bob Pockers reported says that Phoenix, they will not be using the option tire for the championship race. Obviously, there was a little bit of conversation about maybe bringing an option tire, which is a softer tire that might bring a little bit of a component to the championship race. We saw this in the IndyCar race, and it didn't really affect the race as much, so it did affect the outcome for certain drivers who were on those red tires. But a lot of people were kind of hoping we get the same thing for the championship race to spice it up. But I'm also not surprised and shocked to see this, right? I know Goodyear wants to basically bring a tire that can put on a good show. We all know that racing at Phoenix, regardless of the generation of car, it's just not been that good. When the Xfinity Series can't put on a good show there, you know the racing product at the track is not that great. So I'm not really surprised or shocked to see this overall, that they're not doing this. It's a shame they are. I wish they would maybe consider doing it. But again, I'm not really shocked and not surprised to see this, considering the fact that they don't do a lot of things sometimes Goodyear, and I wish they do certain things, but unfortunately they're not doing what we want. and unfortunately, they will not be bringing an option tire out to Phoenix. Basically, in my opinion, just make tires softer. Don't run the option tire, just run a softer tire. Therefore, I think the race could end up being a lot better than what we've seen in recent years, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Frankie Minz. As Frankie Minz announced on Thursday that he will be back with Raymond Brothers Racing for a couple more Truck Series races in 2024. He'll be driving Homestead Miami Speedway in October, and his second start will be at Phoenix Raceway for the championship event. I believe he only had one more race scheduled for this year. Originally, that was Kansas Speedway for this week. I think that might have got taken out the schedule, if I'm not mistaken, for him. So Frankie has two more starts scheduled for the Raymond brothers. Obviously, Frankie doesn't bring a lot of sponsorship and funding to the table, and that's been one issue for Frankie this year, is they've not been able to bring as much sponsorship and funding that I think he was hoping to bring to the table this year. But I'm glad to see Frankie back behind the wheel of a car or a truck. I think Frankie's a talented race car driver. I think he does have a lot of potential to be successful in the sport, but the big issue for him, Frankie Minz is almost 40 years old, and a lot of times when you get started in this sport at a much later age, usually you don't really set the world on fire and don't perform as great. And I don't think it's a secret that Raymond Brothers, that organization, they have not been the fastest organization in the Truck Series. So I'm not really shocked that he's going back to this team. I remember him being in talk to join Joey Gase Motorsports and basically being owner of that team. Obviously, that did not end up happening, and nothing came from that. I'm really glad, nonetheless, so to see that Frankie's back behind the wheel of the Raymond Brothers organization for a few more races. Really exciting stuff. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Marcus Armstrong. As it was announced on Wednesday that Marcus Armstrong will be driving the number 66 for Meyershank Racing in 2025. He will join Felix Rosenquist, who has signed a multi-year contract recently with Meyershank Racing, and Marcus, who of course who's worked with Chip Ganassi Racing the last year or so. Obviously, Chip Ganassi Racing downsizing their program from a 5-car program down to 3 due to the charter situation going on. He'll move over to the sister program of Meyershank Racing next year. Marcus is a solid driver, in my opinion, and I don't think he's a bad choice to put behind the wheel of this car. But you got Linus Lundqvist, and Linus has driven before with this organization. I feel like Linus is a better choice to put in there. I'm not saying that Marcus is bad. Marcus has been a very solid driver with Chip Ganassi Racing. I don't think anybody should have expected Marcus to perform on the same level as Scott Dixon or Alex Palou, who are two of the most elite drivers. And when you have Kiffin Simpson, who's bringing a lot of funding to the table for the team, they weren't going to get rid of him. So I think Marcus is a good driver. I think he'll do solid with this team next year, but I don't expect him to really set the world on fire in his 6'6". Now, do I think he'll do better than Tom Blomqvist? Definitely, for sure, but I don't expect him to do better than what Dave Malukas has done in the select races he's ran. I think he'll have some good runs next year. I think Chip Ganassi will help. Being with this program will definitely help him for sure. We'll see what Marcus Armstrong can do, see if he can perform in this car in 2025. It's a good opportunity for him. I think it's well-deserved for sure, but I wish there was another certain driver getting behind the wheel of the seat, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about TV ratings from Watkins Glen. So TV ratings later in this past week finally came out for the week, and honestly, they were not very good. For the Cup race, it was 1,809,000 viewers for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Watkins Glen. There was no comparison to last year's Watkins Glen race as it was in July, though I do believe that the race only had a little over 2 million viewers maybe, so that wasn't great last year either. And for the Xfinity race, it only had 778,000 viewers. To be fair, at least the Cup Series and Xfinity Series beat the IndyCar Championship race, which did not get a big viewer base. Obviously, there was a lot of football going on. You had 10 head-to-head football games going on, which is a very rare commodity for the NASCAR Cup Series. They don't usually have to deal with that. But also, road course races in general, they don't put on the greatest product overall recently with the next-gen car. Though I will say Watkins Glen, compared to other next-gen road course races, I think the racing was very, very solid. The other big issue is that there's fatigue. When you have a lot of racing in a row and you don't have a lot of breaks, some people get burned out very quickly. And I think some people definitely needed a break from it, considering the fact it's been a lot of chaos. Some fans have been frustrated with the amount of overtimes we've had. We've had 12 or 13 races this year out of 29 that have been overtime so far this year. And I think a lot of fans do get fatigued with that over time as time progresses and goes on. So I think that's why some fans definitely were really frustrated and wanted to take a little bit of a break from the sport, which personally, I can't blame them for that. When you have a lot of the same stuff going on, the same song and dance all over again, it really doesn't surprise me or shock me. I hope we don't get any more of these wreck fests going forward, but the ratings were down, and you could definitely tell by the viewership of a lot of other YouTubers that the viewership was down on some of these race reviews because people did not tune in the race as much. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RayLanigan Racing. As there was reported by many outlets in the IndyCar paddock that RayLanigan was raided by the FBI on Wednesday morning. Now, we don't really know exactly all the details in regards to that, but a rumor that's been going around and why the FBI raided is because of certain trade secrets. Apparently, it's kind of like a white-collar crime or something like that, where apparently like infrastructure or something like that, when it comes to that stuff, the FBI can get involved. A little bit interesting note, apparently a former Andretti employee was working at RayLanigan Racing. He just moved over there this year, and it's rumored that they maybe were sharing trade secrets. Now, we don't know officially all the stuff coming out about it. We'll probably know more information as time goes on and times progress, but only in motorsports we're going to have all this crazy stuff end up happening, and you really don't know who's right in the situation, who's wrong. But when the FBI is getting involved, it's never a good sign. And you think about what's going on over at Rahal. There's not going to have Christian Lundgaard next year. There's drivers looking for rides in 2025 that don't have seats yet for this year. And this doesn't really help their cause and situation on who they're going to pick up. Most likely, your Vips is going to be one of the drivers. But there's rumors about Alexander Rossi going over here. Maybe Rinus VeeKay recently as well, who we'll talk about in the second video later today. But I think that this is a massive story for IndyCar. We've seen a lot of chaos in the IndyCar world, especially with what happened with Penske early in the year, and it's kind of wild to see that RayLanigan Racing was raided by the FBI recently. Really crazy stuff overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Camaro. As Bob Pockers was answering a question in regards to what kind of body that Chevrolet will be using in 2025. And Bob says, well, they have not officially announced what kind of body style they're going to be using for 2025. More than likely, the Camaro will end up being used for the 2025 season. What most likely will end up taking place is that they'll basically just call it a Chevy. We've seen it with the Ross Chastain Busch Light render that's come out very recently. It looks like it's just going to be called Chevrolet instead of Camaro. Now, why is it a big talking point in conversation? Well, a big reason is because the Chevy Camaro will not be in production anymore going forward. And we don't really know what Chevrolet's future is going to be in NASCAR. Some have theorized in recent months that maybe Chevrolet could leave NASCAR altogether and basically something like Cadillac could come in and replace Chevrolet. Unless Chevy, of course, could bring in one of their other sedans or anything like that, which really the only other sports car you really have is Corvette at this point. Corvette would be a really interesting, it would have so much aerodynamic advantage if they were to use the Corvette, but I think it'd be very interesting to see a Corvette come into play and be the car that NASCAR uses going forward. Now, I don't know what the future will be past 2025 in regards to there was a rumor about a recent test secret or something like that, a secret thing going on that no one really knows what kind of car they're going to be bringing out and what they'll be bringing to the table, but I think it's very interesting for sure that we still don't know at this point the full details on that story at this time. As more information comes out on this, we'll continue to cover it here. I really am intrigued to see what they end up using because they've used the Camaro now for almost a decade at this point because they started using the Camaro back in 2018 when they switched from the Chevy SS over to the next car they ended up using in 2018, which of course was the Camaro, and we all know there was a big struggle for Chevrolet. But I think it's also affected Chevy, unless your name is Hendrick Motorsports, because the Hendrick cars have been the only Chevrolets to consistently have pace on a week-by-week basis. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what they end up using and what kind of car they do end up using for sure in the not-so-distant future for what Chevy does go ahead and decide using and see if they can still keep up and continue their dominance like they've had for many, many years. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the next-gen car. As there was reported by Matt Weaver on Wednesday that Christopher Bell says that driving standards have changed as soon as everyone realized the next-gen could take a beating. This, of course, is reference to last week's race at Watkins Glen, and it's been in reference to a lot of the racing etiquette we've seen in the NASCAR Cup Series. If you've seen a lot of races, like I mentioned not too long ago, there have been 12 out of 29 races this year that have had overtime, which is a record, by the way, for the NASCAR Cup Series. In addition to that, I can't tell the exact number of overtimes we had, but it's got to be around 35 to 40 at this point, considering Nashville had 5 overtimes. But it's when we get to the end of these races. It's not usually in the beginning. It's usually at the end of these races where the drivers lose their cool and lose their heads. We've seen it with a lot of drivers recently. Kyle Larson kind of caused an incident at Watkins Glen. Was involved in certain incidents in the race, like kind of caused Todd Gillen to check up, and Chase Elliott, Mark Truex Jr., and Kyle Busch and those guys had nowhere to go. You think about other races like what happened in Richmond when Austin Dillon just plowed through Denny Hamlin and basically Joey Logano and dumped both those drivers to get the victory. And then, of course, that win didn't count toward the playoffs. I feel like with the next-gen car, the easiest thing they maybe could do is get rid of some of the stuff, the strength on this car. Make it to where this car can fall apart a lot more. Therefore, I think the driving standards could go up a lot better, and you don't have guys plowing through each other on a week-by-week basis. This is the big problem with this next-gen car, is drivers, especially older veterans too at times, but mostly the younger drivers, they are the ones that are causing a lot of incidents and a lot of the issues on the racetrack. And unfortunately, it's affecting the racing product, not in a positive way, but really in a negative way. And I really hope this can change going forward. I don't want to see the best race car drivers in the world plowing through each other at all these tracks. Sure, you get fantastic finishes like we saw with Kyle Larson and Chris Buescher at Kansas, which we're going there this week. You also, of course, look at the great finish between Shane Van Gisbergen and Chris Buescher. One of the best battles we've seen all year so far. In general, I think that if the racing standards can be cleaned up, I think the racing product 100% can get a lot better. But we've seen the driving standards drop off significantly, and it's really, really concerning for the future. I really hope NASCAR can kind of sort this issue out, maybe find a way for there to be certain areas where the car can take a little bit more of a beating so that you don't see these cars being indestructible and drivers basically take it out by wrecking drivers for the win. It's got to change going forward, in my opinion, and I really hope it does end up happening soon in the not-so-distant future where the driving standards do actually improve and get a lot better. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR silly season once again. Now, it was reported on Friday by Bob Pockrass that he basically put out a very interesting thing in regards to the rookie battle. He does know that Connor Zilisch will be with Junior Motorsports next year. He also does know a few drivers like Christian Eckes and Nick Sanchez, we're going to talk about a little bit, will be part of the rookie battle. But two names that Bob Pockrass did mention that might be part of the rookie battle for 2025 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series are William Sawalich and Taylor Gray. Now, it's been rumored over the course of the last couple months that William Sawalich and Taylor Gray are most likely going to be headed to the NASCAR Xfinity Series full-time in 2025, driving for Joe Gibbs Racing. William Sawalich obviously would not be a shock or surprise. He will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut next month at Homestead Miami Speedway when he does turn 18 years old. And Taylor Gray's also made select starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year for Joe Gibbs Racing with pretty solid results, all things considered. Now, the numbers have not been announced. We also do know that Brandon Jones will be back over at Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025. My guess is most likely Taylor Gray will drive the 20 car next year. Brandon Jones will probably get his old number that he used in 2018 in those priors when he drove for JGR and will drive probably the number 819. And then William Sawalich, who will be, I believe, in the 18 car, actually the 19 car, probably will get the number 18 car as Sheldon Creed, of course, will be heading over to Haas Factory Team. While you do have Chandler Smith, whose future a little in question, though he could go to Front Row and Cup, but it's been known at this point if that is going to happen. I'm very intrigued to see what happens in regards to the rest of the silly season for Xfinity, which you'll see a little more talk about that most likely in the video tomorrow, or later today, I should say. But I think when it comes to silly season for some of the other stuff, I think Williams Walsh and Taylor Gray, both talented drivers. Taylor made the playoffs this year, of course, and Williams Walsh, well, he hasn't been as strong as a driver like Connor Zilic in ARCA. He's still been a solid driver in ARCA and has gotten like 7 or 8 ARCA wins so far this year. Actually, 8, with his win at Bristol. So he's been very good this year. And I think that William does deserve a chance and an opportunity to see what he can do in the NASCAR Xfinity Series full-time next year. I expect both drivers to be pretty good. And I think they both have solid years in the Xfinity Series, though I don't know if they're going to end up making the playoffs in 2025 with how in-depth the competition is going to be for the 2025 NASCAR Xfinity Series season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Zach Brown, the CEO of McLaren F1 in McLaren, was on the Happy Harvick podcast with Kevin Harvick. And Kevin Harvick actually asked a question to Zach Brown in regards to, will we see Kyle Larson potentially get behind the wheel of a Formula One car in the future? And Zach Brown actually responded and said, that's the plan that we are looking to do in the future. Get Kyle Larson behind the wheel in an F1 car in some sort of capacity. Now, here's a big thing about Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson does not have enough super license points to get a Formula One license. To get a Formula One super license, you have to have 40 points. Kyle Larson, in my understanding, has 29 points at the moment. Now, if Kyle Larson is to win the NASCAR Cup Series Championship this year, I do believe Kyle Larson goes from 29 up to 40, though I don't know if his 2022 numbers in 23 would really help his case getting it. But if you win the NASCAR Cup Series Championship, I think you get 15 or 16 points, so Kyle Larson would theoretically most likely get the super license that he needs. So if he wanted to do a test, he's got to get the super license. But could we see a driver swap, perhaps? Obviously, we know what happened in 2011 when Lewis Hamilton and Tony Stewart with their sponsor Mobil 1 in 2011. We saw them do a driver swap at Watkins Glen. Lewis drove the 14 car for quite a bit, and Tony Stewart drove a F1 McLaren Mercedes car that he ended up driving. And I think it was very successful for the sport, and it gave a lot of that crossover. I think it'd be really cool to see Lando, maybe get Quadrant involved with that as well, but see Kyle Larson in a Formula One car in some sort of capacity. Kyle Larson is the best driver in NASCAR in the moment, in my opinion, and one of the best race car drivers we have ever seen over the last 25 years. He's one of the greatest drivers ever, and I think Kyle Larson getting a chance to be in Formula One in some sort of capacity would be really cool. Now, again, I don't ever see him getting behind the wheel of an F1 car for a race or even a test. Most likely we'll see a driver swap, but it would be pretty damn cool to see Kyle Larson get the chance and opportunity to get in an F1 car. He is one of the best drivers out there, and I think there's a lot of drivers in Formula One that would be sweating if Kyle Larson came into their turf and was faster than a lot of the Formula One drivers. He'd probably get behind the wheel of the 2021 McLaren, because I think with the testing cars, if you want to do a swap, it's got to be a car from a few years ago, so Larson probably being a really slow McLaren, though in 21, to be fair, Lando Norris had a lot of speed, so maybe Larson will be pretty quick, but it'd be pretty awesome to see this, and I want to see Kyle Larson continue to prove why he is the best driver in the world and go in there and be successful. I think it'd be really good for NASCAR, and I think it'd be really good for motorsports all across the board, considering, in my opinion, Kyle Larson is one of the best race car drivers in the world, and he's definitely almost better, in my opinion, than Max Verstappen, though Verstappen is still a very good driver, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about lane race. It was reported by Amanda Busick from Fox Sports during practice that Lane Race has signed a contract extension with Front Row Motorsports and will return to Front Row Motorsports in 2025 in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, driving the number 38 car. Lane Race has been the full-time driver so far this year in 2024, and the year started off really, really slow. However, if you look at the last 6 Truck Series races, Lane Race has had 5 top 5 finishes, including picking up 2 consecutive victories at Milwaukee and Bristol. He has been the playoff spoiler so far in 2024. It's just a shame that Lane was not able to make the playoffs in 2024, because I think he theoretically could have had a shot to make the championship 4. This was obviously a new team coming into the year. A lot of the people that are part of Front Row Motorsports originally got reshuffled to different positions. They got a rookie crew chief in there. Dylan Capello replaced Chris Lawson. Chris Lawson was supposed to be over there to help Front Row Motorsports truck program. It's still unknown if that's going on. But Dylan has really improved his craft as a crew chief. He's a very young crew chief as well. And this 38 team is really gelling. Like I said, this has been a very strong second half of the year. And I think 2025 could be a lot better for Lane Riggs. It would not surprise or shock me if Lane Riggs goes into 2025 and contends for the championship next year, considering you're not going to have Christian Eckes next year, you're not going to have Nick Sanchez in the Truck Series, and you may not have Corey Haim, though Corey Haim most likely is moving up next year. Well, staying in the Truck Series. You're also not having Daniel Dye next year, and there's some other drivers that could be on the move and moving to new series in 2025. And front row is only going to get better. I think he could be the biggest threat to Corey Haim next year with the strength and speed he's been showing as of recently, and he's been super impressive in the second half of this year. I've really enjoyed to see the growth of Lane. I really thought he was going to have the success at the start of the year, but the growth this year has been so phenomenal and amazing to see, and I think he definitely deserves to be back with this team in 2025. If you want my predictions, I think he wins at least 3 to 4 races potentially next year, and I do think he will make the championship 4. He does got to get better on the bigger ovals because we know where his bread and butter is, and it's the shorter ovals. But he's got to get better on the mile and a half, which he showed speed on mile and a half early in the year. I go back to Charlotte where he had top 5 speed before he had an electrical issue. I go back to Texas where he had a top 5 speed before he had some sort of mechanical issue. They've really gotten that together, and they've picked it up, and I think this team is really starting to excel in a pretty major way. I'm really excited to see what Lane can do in 2025, because I do think Lane is going to do a really solid job in the 2025 season, and I think it's amazing and fantastic and great to see that Lane Riggs is going to be back next year. I do think he's going to do a really solid, and I think he'll do a pretty fantastic job with Farmer Motorsports once again in 2025. We're still waiting on who that last driver is for the NASCAR Cup Series program. We do think Zane Smith's the favorite to get the 3rd front row seat. We'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to who gets behind the wheel of that seat for 2025. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Nick Sanchez. As it was officially announced on Wednesday late morning that Nick Sanchez will be joining Big Machine Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025, driving a number 40 A car. We discussed this on the channel this past week on Wednesday when it was officially confirmed and announced. Nick Sanchez has been a very solid driver in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series over the course of the last couple of seasons. He, of course, will replace Park Clearman, who will retire from full-time racing at the end of this year to focus on other endeavors going into 2025, though Parker will still most likely be part-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and probably in the Craftsman Truck Series as well. But when you look at Nick Sanchez, look what he's done in the Craftsman Truck Series this year. From 2023 to 2024, he has taken major steps forward. He's got 2 wins so far this year at Daytona and Charlotte Motor Speedway, and Nick Sanchez is very likely to make it to the next round of the playoffs and has a really good chance and a strong opportunity to make it to the championship 4 in 2024. It does also need to be noted that Gamebridge will be sponsoring this as an associate sponsor, so Spire Motorsports will be associated with this team in a little bit of capacity, and having that money come in, they'll be looking to get more resources. I know Eric mentioned this in his video recently. There could be a second Xfinity car for the team on a part-time basis, but it's unknown at this point what they're going to be doing at this point for 2025. As going back to Nick Sanchez, this is a really good hire, and he joins a very elite rookie class for 2025. Obviously, Christian Eckes, who's going to be driving a 16 car for Colleague Racing. Daniel Dye is going to be driving a 10 car for Colleague Racing. You've obviously got Connor Zilic, who will be driving, of course, the number 88 car for Junior Motorsports. You've obviously got rumors of Taylor Gray and William Swatch and even Carson Quaffle, who we'll be talking about later this week. But I think Nick Sanchez has a lot of potential. I think there's a really strong chance and a great opportunity as well that Nick Sanchez is going to make the playoffs in 2025. He has been very solid, and remember, he also does have a little bit of experience with Big Machine Racing from back in the day. So I do think that this pair and combination together is going to be very strong, and I do think they're going to excel in a pretty major way in 2025. If you want my prediction, I don't think Nick Sanchez realistically is going to win a race next year, but I do think that he'll make the playoffs more than likely. They're going to be losing drivers like AJ Allmendinger. and Shane Van Gisbergen. And of course, Hailie-Deegan won't be there most likely. But of course, it won't be guys like Cole Custer and Riley Hurst more than likely will be in the Cup Series. But there's going to be gaining a lot of talent in the Xfinity Series. Continues when you lose really big names and really big drivers who move up to other series and move down to other series. You gain more of these really talented race car drivers. And I think it's really cool to see that the Xfinity Series continues to grow. It's really huge for the sport and really fantastic nonetheless to see that Nick Sanchez is getting the chance and opportunity. I do think Nick Sanchez is going to do a very solid, a very fantastic, and a really great job with this organization in 2025. I expect him to have a lot of speed, and I do expect him to for sure 100% contend in the 2025 NASCAR Xfinity season. I think he'll probably end up making the playoffs for sure in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode as we're talking about Harrison Burton. As it was officially confirmed on Friday morning that Harrison Burton will be joining AM Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025, most likely in the number 15 car. Now, the number has not been officially announced at this point for 2025, but most likely Harrison Burton will be behind the wheel of the number 15 car for 2025. All the 4 teams in the Xfinity Series, Roush Yates teams like Haas Factory Team, AM Racing, and of course the RSS Racing Organization, who could be having some big announcements here in the not so distant future, they will all be working together a lot more closely. Now, going back to the Harrison Burton news, I had heard this rumor a while back about a month or so ago, that Harrison Burton was the most likely driver to get behind the wheel of the number 15 car. Now, when a lot of people think of AM Racing, they think of struggles. AM Racing has struggled a lot this year in 2024. Hailie-Deegan has signed a multi-year contract to drive for AM Racing through 2024 and 2025, and she lost her ride around the Chicago Street Course weekend after she only had 4 top 20 finishes through the first 14 or 15 races and nearly ended up missing a couple races throughout the year as well. Then after she was let go and fired from the team, they brought Joey Logano in, who got a top 10 at one race, and then of course got a top 10 at Watkins Glen later in the year. Then they've had Josh Berry and Lawless Allen. Now, they have struggled. They've had a lot of issues. They've had a lot of things they've really messed up on, and a lot of things they got to focus on for 2025. But having a veteran like Harrison Burton, who's been in the Cup Series now for 3 years, I think bringing Harrison Burton in to really help the program, I think is definitely really huge for the team. Look, Harrison Burton may not be the best NASCAR Cup Series driver out there, but he is a very good and solid Xfinity Series driver. Harrison Burton had very much a lot of pace and speed in the Xfinity Series. He got 4 wins in 2020, his rookie year. While he wasn't as strong in 2021, he still had a pretty solid year in 2021. I think the big problem for Harrison Burton was he rushed up way too quickly. He was not ready for the NASCAR Cup Series and originally was supposed to be in the Xfinity Series for 2022 to drive for Team Penske's Xfinity program, but when Dex Imaging wanted to move up and basically Brad Keselowski moved over to own RFK Racing, they really had no options or no choice to go with that at that point. I think that's why Harrison Burton moved up, and he just never really showed his stuff. I know he got that win in Daytona, but he got it on the last lap pass. Not the most impressive thing, if you ask me. Matt DiBenedetto formed a lot better in that car. Ryan Blaney formed a lot better, and Paul Menard had also formed a lot better in that car as well. But going back down to Xfinity and basically making your career a lot better is really not a bad thing. And I do think that Harrison Burton in 2025 is going to perform a lot better next year. Now, realistically, I think the goal for Harrison Burton in 2025 should be top 20 in the standings, because the Xfinity Series is going to be extremely stacked next year. You're obviously going to have Connor Zilch coming in next year. You're going to have Carson Quavo potentially coming in next year. You're going to basically be losing guys like AJ Allmendinger, Shane Van Gisbergen, and those guys. But you're also getting, of course, like I said, Christian Eckes earlier. Daniel Dye is coming into play. You're going to have Taylor Gray and William Swalsh most likely moving up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year. You've got other drivers moving in. You got RSS, who's shown a lot of improvement this year. And I think bringing Harrison in, though, is a very good move. So realistically, top 20 of the standings should be a goal. I know Harrison said during the NASCAR Xfinity race that he's hoping to bring a victory for the team and organization, but realistically, I don't see Harrison Burton going out there in winning a race with AM Racing. I do think he's going to show some solid pace and speed for sure, but I don't expect him to really set the world on fire. I do think a couple top 10s are in order. If they can keep the mechanical issues out of the way, I do expect Harrison Burton to probably form a lot better. I think Harrison is a talented driver who can get the best out of equipment. Well, maybe not get the best out of equipment, but I do think Harrison Burton has a lot of potential to really show what he's capable of in 2025. And apparently it's a multi-year deal, so it'll probably be an Xfinity. Now, big question is, could he go to the NASCAR Cup Series part-time? That is certainly a possibility. I definitely think there is a chance he may end up driving part-time for Rick Ware, because Rick Ware does sound like they're going to run at least 2 cars in 2025, despite rumors of RFK buying a charter for Ryan Preece to get behind the wheel. But it's a good opportunity for Harrison. I hope he can make the best of it and do a really solid and great job with this organization in 2025. It's a good opportunity. We'll see what Harrison Burton can do with the AM Racing organization in the 2025 NASCAR Xfinity season. We'll see what he does next season. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, we discussed this on the channel on Wednesday, but it's officially confirmed after months of speculation that Bubba Wallace has finally signed a multi-year contract extension with 23XI Racing, which is a 2-year deal. So Bubba Wallace will remain in the number 23 car for 2025 and also in 2026. This is not a major shock or surprise to see, but a reason some probably are shocked is because a couple weeks prior, 23XI and Bubba had kind of said this, I think, at Darlington when they did not sign the charter agreement. Bubba Wallace basically said that he was very frustrated about the situation going on and did not know what his future was going to be looking like, and if he weren't going to be running and what his future was going to be looking like. It was kind of on hold until they signed a charter agreement. I don't know what this means for the charter agreement, but let's get to talking about Bubba Wallace. I know some are going to sit here and say, Bubba Wallace does not deserve this ride. He has not earned the opportunity to get back behind the wheel of this car for next year. I completely disagree with a lot of people, and here's why. Bubba Wallace has been a very solid driver in the NASCAR Cup Series, and every single year he has gotten better. In 2021, he got a victory at Talladega Superspeedway, driving a 23 car. Yes, it was rain shortened, but still, a win is a win. It was in the right position and the right time. Then 2022, he didn't make the playoffs, but he got a win at Kansas and got that 45 in the Owners' Points playoffs as well, and had a pretty strong season in 2023 too. Then 2023 was even better. He got 5 top 5s and 10 top 10s and also made the playoffs and made it to the round of 12 as well. Well, he did not make the playoffs in 2024. Bubba Wallace now had a record for top 5s and top 10s in a season, with 6 top 5s after finishing in a respectable 3rd place at Bristol Motor Speedway and finishing in the top 10, getting 11 top 5s. He's had a pretty good year. And let's also talk about this too, the elephant in the room. Bubba Wallace brings a lot of sponsorship and funding to the table. He's the reason why companies like McDonald's have come into play and work with boat drivers at the team. He's the reason why other companies like DoorDash over the years and other companies like the Air Force, for example, has come back to the team and other groups that work with him. A lot of the sponsors would not be over at 23XI Racing if Bubba Wallace was not the driver behind the wheel. And again, Bubba Wallace is still a very solid race car driver. Really, right now, who are the best options that you could have put behind the wheel? I don't think Sam Mayer was ready at all. Zane Smith, well, I think is a very good driver, and I think Denny Hamlin should hopefully consider him in the future. Zane's going to front row next year. Who else was going to be available? Maybe Kyle Busch, but Kyle Busch, in my opinion, he's definitely better when he's on point, but Bubba Wallace has been better than Kyle Busch all year so far. Justin Haley was not going to be a better option. There had been talk about Justin Haley maybe or maybe not going over to 23XI at one point, but obviously that did not end up happening, and he's going over to Spire in 2025. So I really don't know where people think that any people in the series would have done great. And I don't think Corey Heim, no disrespect to Corey, Corey's a very talented driver, but I think Bubba Wallace is also a better driver than Corey Heim. I think he's got more talent, at least a little bit, though Corey's a very talented driver, don't get that mistaken, but I think Bubba Wallace is a very talented driver. He's no slouch. He's won 6 or 7 Truck Series races, was pretty solid in Xfinity Series, and every year in the NASCAR Cup Series, he has gotten a lot better. Now, the goal in 2025, he's got a few goals. Number 1, he needs to win a race. He needs to get back to victory lane either for the end of this year or needs to get to victory lane in 2025. Number 2, he has got to stop being on the playoff bubble. I'll give a lot of people this criticism on him. He's been in the playoff bubble battle for a long time, and he's got to get away from being part of that playoff bubble battle every single year. If he can do that and be top 10 consistently in the points, that would be great. But let's also put something in perspective too. Bubba Wallace would have made the playoffs in 2024 had we not a bunch of drivers win. He beat 6 drivers in the point standings that were behind him that got wins. Joey Logano, Alex Bowman, Chase Briscoe, Daniel Suarez, Austin Cindric, and Harrison Burton. Bubba Wallace outran those drivers all season long for the most part, and he still unfortunately didn't make the playoffs because of the win in your in system. And Bubba has been in the top 16 points pretty much the whole entire season. He's been having a fantastic and really good year for his standards. I really hope he can win before the end of the year. And now going into 2025 again, he needs to get a victory. I think there's a really good chance he wins a race or two. If this team continues to improve and exceed expectations like they've been doing very, very recently, I could definitely see Bubba Wallace going out there and contending for a championship in the future. I know that Tyler Reddick has done a lot better than Bubba Wallace this year. There's no denying that, but you also have to remember that Tyler Reddick is a generational talent. Bubba is not a generational talent. He's a very solid and pretty good driver, but he's not on the same level as guys like Tyler Reddick or Kyle Larson or even Chase Elliott. He's not on that same level, but he's still a pretty respectful and good driver. And I think Bubba deserves respect, and I feel like a lot of people have been discrediting Bubba because he's not on the same level as Tyler Reddick. And I think Bubba Wallace is a much better driver than Tyler Reddick, in my honest opinion. He absolutely deserves to be back at 20-11 Racing for 2025. He's earned the right to come back, and I do think that Bubba Wallace is going to do a pretty solid and good job with 20-11 Racing once again next year. I think he'll do great, and I think he'll improve. Do we see Booty Barker come back in the future? Who knows at this point? Maybe Booty gets one more year, and then they switch up the crew chief in 26 if things don't get better. That's been one of their biggest Achilles heel, has been the crew chief. But I do, like I said, think that Bubba Wallace 100% deserves to be back with 20-11 Racing for sure in 2025. So, that is going to today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. List description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. How do you think Bubba Wallace is going to improve in 2025? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. And how do you think that Harrison Burton is going to do at AM Racing? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. Later this morning, you'll see another NASCAR news video discussions over the course of the last couple days. Then tomorrow, we're going to see 2025 NASCAR Xfinity Series playoff predictions. Tuesday, and also Truck Series race picks as well, most likely. Then on Wednesday, you're going to see a NASCAR news video and Xfinity Series race picks for Kansas. And then on Thursday, we'll have race picks for the Cup race at Kansas. And we'll also have the Penske video dropping as well. Got a lot of great content dropping over the course of the next couple days that I cannot wait for you guys to check out. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.